The late afternoon sun filtered through holes in the rusted tin roof, casting narrow rays onto the cracked dirt floor where a frail body lay silently among the ruins. Atlas, a Belgian Malinois war dog who once stood proud on Syria's battlefields, was now merely a shadow of his former self. Rusted chains dug deep into his neck, caked with dust and dried blood remnants of countless merciless days in captivity. His once glossy dark coat now clung to his skeletal frame in dirty clumps, shedding in patches that revealed parched, scarred skin beneath. Gone was the scent of hot sand and gunpowder. Gone was the comforting voice that once guided him through chaos. What remained was a deathly silence occasionally broken by the buzzing of flies near his clouded eyes. Yet when heavy footsteps approached, slow, deliberate, familiar, Atlas held his breath. A tremor passed through his broken body. He knew who stood on the other side of that rusted door before it creaked open. Through the blinding light, a silhouette appeared. In that moment, within his dying gaze sparked the recognition that would ignite an unstoppable inferno of justice. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Sergeant Abigail "Abby" Mitchell had never imagined civilian life would feel more disorienting than combat. At 28, the third-generation Marine from Bristol, Virginia carried her military bearing and every step shoulders squared, gaze direct, movements precise. 3 tours in Syria had left her with a Purple Heart, a medical discharge after shrapnel tore through her left leg, and nightmares that medication couldn't touch. But what haunted her most wasn't what she'd brought home. It was who she'd left behind. Atlas had been more than her military working dog. The Belgian Malinois with intelligent amber eyes had been her partner, her protector, and often her only source of comfort in the dusty hell of Syria's war zones. Together they'd located 37 IEDs, participated in countless missions, and saved more American lives than either had been able to count. When insurgents ambushed their unit in Raqqa, Atlas had dragged her bleeding body 200 yards to safety, despite taking shrapnel himself. The last time she saw him, he was being loaded into a transport while she lay on a stretcher, too weak from blood loss to fight the separation. "He'll be reassigned temporarily until you recover," her commanding officer had promised. That was 3 years ago. Colonel Richard "Rick" Townsend wore his decorations like armor against scrutiny. At 54, the square-jawed officer had built his reputation on battlefield brilliance and uncompromising standards. Few questioned the logistics behind his private military dog training facility, officially designated for rehabilitation and reassignment of tactical canine assets. Even fewer knew what happened to dogs deemed unsuitable for continued service. In rural Montana, where winters buried the landscape under unforgiving snow and summers baked the earth to dust, Dr. Eleanor Ellie Whitman had built a veterinary practice that specialized in working animals. The daughter of a Vietnam veteran, she understood that some wounds never appeared on X-rays. Marcus Coleman had served in the same regiment as Abby, but remained skeptical of her conspiracy theories about missing military dogs. As the local VFW chapter president, he believed in the chain of command and proper channels. None of them yet realized how their lives would intertwine through a single chained dog, or that 10-year-old Lily Patterson, who rarely spoke due to her autism, would become the unexpected heart of a battle that would challenge the very definition of loyalty, justice, and what it truly means to leave no one behind. The manila envelope arrived on Abby's doorstep unmarked, its presence as unexpected as its contents would prove devastating. Inside a flash drive containing logistics spreadsheets, requisition forms, and transfer orders for military working dogs, documents that should never have left secure military servers. Abby's hands trembled as she scrolled through file after file, coffee growing cold beside her laptop. The sender remained anonymous, but the message was clear. Something was deeply wrong with the military working dog program. She almost missed Atlas's ID number. It appeared in a column labeled Reassignment Training Facility C, alongside 24 others. The designation meant nothing to her until she cross-referenced it with the remaining documents. Training Facility C wasn't a military installation at all. It was registered to a private corporation, Townsend Tactical Solutions, Colonel Townsend's company. "This doesn't make sense," she muttered, rubbing the ache in her leg where titanium now reinforced shattered bone. Military dogs were government property, not transferable to private entities without extensive paperwork and oversight. Yet here was evidence of dozens being redirected without proper channels. 3 sleepless nights later, Abby found herself driving a rented pickup along a rutted Montana road, following coordinates extracted from the files. Her therapist would call this reckless abandoning medication schedules and PTSD management techniques for a wild chase across the country. But some bonds transcended rational thought. Atlas had saved her life. She wouldn't abandon him to paperwork and protocol. The facility appeared suddenly around a bend, a sprawling compound of low buildings surrounded by chain link and barbed wire. No military markings, no flag, just surveillance cameras and a discreet sign reading "Private Property." Abby parked on a ridge overlooking the complex, studying it through binoculars. The layout matched tactical training grounds she'd seen overseas, complete with obstacle courses and simulation buildings. But something felt wrong about the handler's body language, too aggressive, movements too harsh. She watched for 3 days, sleeping in her truck, documenting patterns. Dogs emerged for training sessions, but never the same ones twice. Some moved well, others appeared weakened or injured. On the 3rd afternoon, she spotted a handler dragging a dog who couldn't support its weight properly. The man's casual cruelty, a kick to the animal's hindquarters when it collapsed, made her blood run cold. Abby wouldn't have recognized Atlas at first glance. The powerful dog who once cleared buildings and detected explosives with precision now moved like a broken machine, head down, ribs protruding beneath a dull coat. But when the handler yanked his leash, she caught a glimpse of his profile, the distinctive notch in his right ear where shrapnel had torn through it the same day it had torn through her leg. "Oh, God," she whispered, bile rising in her throat. "What have they done to you?" Getting inside wasn't the problem. Abby hadn't spent years in Force Recon without learning how to bypass basic security. The problem was staying undetected long enough to confirm Atlas's identity and condition. She waited until 2 a.m., when the night shift guards made their predictable rounds, then slipped through a maintenance access point, disabling a single camera long enough to pass. The kennel building stank of disinfectant masking filth. No climate control despite Montana's temperature extremes. Just rows of chain-link runs with concrete floors, many containing dogs in various states of distress. Some paced neurotically, others lay motionless except for labored breathing. Military working dogs, animals trained to detect explosives, apprehend targets, and protect their handlers reduced to inventory in metal cages. She found him in the furthest run, curled against the back wall. His identification tattoo confirmed what her heart already knew: K435 Atlas. The numbers inked inside his ear during initial training. The dog who'd once tracked insurgents through miles of hostile territory now couldn't even lift his head at her approach. "Atlas," she whispered, her voice breaking. "It's me. "It's Abby." His clouded eyes flickered, but there was no recognition, only the learned wariness of an animal accustomed to pain. When she reached slowly through the chain link, he flinched away. The lock required a key she didn't have. Looking around desperately, Abby spotted bolt cutters hanging on the maintenance wall. The noise would almost certainly alert security, but she couldn't leave him. Not again. Not like this. The metal gave way with a snap that seemed to echo through the building. As she swung the gate open, low growl emanated from Atlas's throat, the warning of a dog who expected only cruelty. "I know, buddy," she whispered, tears tracking down her face. "I know they hurt you, but it's me. It's your girl." She extended her hand, palm down, and waited. 1 second, 2. Then slowly, painfully, Atlas raised his head. His nostrils flared, taking in her scent. Something shifted in those dulled eyes, a flicker of what might have been memory. Before she could reach for him, floodlights blazed through the windows. A siren wailed across the compound. They'd been discovered. "We're leaving," Abby said, her Marine training kicking in as she assessed exits and threats. "Together this time, I promise." But as running footsteps approached the building, she realized the promise might be impossible to keep. The security guard never saw the kick coming. Abby's combat boots connected with his knee with a sickening crack, driving him to the floor before he could radio for backup. She didn't want to hurt him, he was just doing his job, but Atlas was her priority now. The second guard received similar treatment, a precise strike to the solar plexus that left him gasping for air rather than calling for reinforcements. "Come on, boy," she urged, turning back to Atlas. The dog hadn't moved from his kennel, whether from fear, confusion, or physical inability. He remained frozen, eyes darting between Abby and the fallen guards. Years of military training had taught him to respond to commands, but years of abuse had taught him that disobedience meant pain. "Atlas, heal," she tried, her voice firm despite the tears threatening to spill. It was the command they'd used thousands of times in Syria, the foundation of their working relationship. Nothing, not even a twitch of recognition. Time was running out. More guards would come. Desperation made her reach for the chain still attached to his collar, but he growled a warning rumble deep in his chest. "I'm not going to hurt you," she whispered, pulling her hand back slowly. "But we can't stay here." The sound of approaching vehicles settled the matter. Abby made a decision that broke every rule of animal handling. She lifted the 60-pound dog into her arms. Atlas tensed but didn't bite, his body too weak for real resistance. Up close, she could feel every rib, smell the infection festering in untreated wounds, see the pressure sores where he'd lain too long on concrete. They escaped through a rear maintenance door moments before the building filled with armed security. Abby's legs screamed in protest as she carried Atlas across the compound, keeping to shadows and blind spots in the surveillance system. By the time they reached her truck, her arms burned and her surgical scars throbbed. But adrenaline kept her moving. "We're going to be okay," she told Atlas as she placed him gently in the passenger seat. He cowered against the door, as far from her as possible. The Malinois, who had once slept pressed against her side in desert outposts, now couldn't bear human proximity. The truck's engine roared to life, and Abby floored the accelerator, kicking up dirt as they sped away from Townsend's facility. In the rearview mirror, she watched security vehicles pouring through the main gate. They had minutes at most before pursuit. Her phone rang a Montana number she didn't recognize. "This is Dr. Eleanor Whitman," said a measured voice when Abby answered on speaker. "A friend at the sheriff's office told me someone might be coming my way with a military working dog in bad shape. That you—" Abby hesitated, checking the mirror again. "How do I know I can trust you?" "You don't," the woman replied simply. "But I'm guessing that dog needs immediate medical attention. And the nearest emergency vet is 2 hours away. I'm 20 minutes south on Route 15. Red mailbox, White House, back entrance, has no cameras." The line went dead before Abby could respond. She had little choice. Atlas's breathing had become labored, his eyes half closed. Whatever strength had sustained him through their escape was fading fast. Dr. Whitman was waiting when they pulled in, veterinary bag in hand. She made no comment about Abby's mud-stained clothes or the tears tracking through dirt on her face. Her focus went immediately to Atlas. Belgian Malinois, male, approximately 7 years old, she assessed clinically, approaching the truck slowly. "Military working dog, judging by the tattoo and your expression. Let's get him inside." The examination room was warm and clean, nothing like the sterile military facilities or the filthy kennel they'd escaped. Dr. Whitman worked efficiently, hooking up IV fluids, checking vitals, and taking samples while speaking softly to Atlas the entire time. The dog remained unnaturally still, eyes following every movement but making no sound. Severe malnutrition. Pressure sores from prolonged confinement. Evidence of electrical burns consistent with shock collars. The vet's voice remained professional, but her hands shook slightly. Multiple partially healed fractures, and these marks on his chest and back legs. He was used as a demonstration dog for attack training. They let other dogs practice on him. Abby turned away, fist pressed against her mouth to stifle a sob. "He'll need extensive treatment," Dr. Whitman continued. "Antibiotics, wound care, physical therapy, nutritional support, the physical stuff we can fix. The psychological damage—" She trailed off, meeting Abby's eyes. "That's another matter entirely. I can pay," Abby said quickly, "whatever it costs." Dr. Whitman studied her. "That's not my concern. My concern is what happens when Colonel Townsend realizes who took his dog." Abby froze. "You know Townsend. Everyone in the military community around here knows Townsend Tactical. They employ half the county." The vet's expression hardened. "Not everyone approves of their methods. My brother served in the Marines, came home with half his face reconstructed after an IED, said a dog like this one saved his unit. Then you understand why I couldn't leave him. I understand you've just made a powerful enemy." Dr. Whitman carefully attached a drip to Atlas's front leg. "Townsend has connections, military, local government, law enforcement. He won't let this go." "I don't care. Atlas is mine. We served together. They had no right. Rights don't matter much to men like Townsend." The vet interrupted. "Power does." Atlas whimpered softly on the table, the first voluntary sound he'd made. Abby moved to his side instinctively, hand hovering near his head without touching. She knew better than to push contact too soon. "What would you have done?" she asked quietly. Dr. Whitman sighed. "The same damn thing. Probably." She reached for her phone. "I need to make a call. My cousin runs an animal sanctuary near Glacier. Remote, defensible. You can stay there while I treat Atlas and you figure out next steps." "Why are you helping us?" The vet paused, her hand absently touching a photo on the wall, a smiling Marine with extensive facial scarring standing beside her. "Because my brother didn't come home alone. His nightmares came with him. and the only thing that helps is the service dog he works with now." She turned back to Abby, expression resolute. "Military dogs save lives over there. They deserve better than this when they come home," as if understanding her words. Atlas's eyes fixed on Abby's face for the briefest moment. Something flickered there, not recognition exactly, but perhaps the first fragile tendril of trust. The sanctuary sat nestled against the foothills of the Rocky Mountains, its 50 acres protected by natural barriers and a single access road. Weathered wooden buildings clustered in the center, a main house, a barn converted to kennels, and several outbuildings from the covered porch. Abby could see for miles across the Montana wilderness, the perfect vantage point for someone who had learned in combat to watch for approaching threats. "My cousin calls it the Last Chance Ranch," Dr. Whitman Ellie had explained when they arrived under cover of darkness. Started as a refuge for abused horses, expanded to include working dogs that couldn't adjust to civilian homes, remote enough that Townsend's people won't stumble across it accidentally. For 3 days, Atlas had remained critical, his condition teetering between improvement and decline. Ellie visited daily, administering IV antibiotics and fluids, carefully debriding infected wounds, and monitoring his vital signs. Abby slept on a cot beside his kennel, present but not crowding him, reading mission reports aloud in the familiar cadence she'd used during their deployments. On the 4th morning, she woke to something brushing her hand. Atlas, still gaunt but more alert, had stretched his muzzle through the kennel bars to touch her fingers. He withdrew immediately when she stirred, but it was the first voluntary contact he'd initiated. "That's progress," Ellie said when she arrived later, checking the incision where she'd drained a particularly nasty abscess on his hind leg. "His blood work is improving too. The infection's responding to treatment. When can I take him home?" The vet's expression grew serious. "Home might not be safe for either of you right now." She pulled out her phone, showing Abby a news article from the local paper. The headline made her stomach clench. "Security breach at military contractor facility. Valuable service dog stolen." "They're calling it theft of government property," Ellie explained. "Townsend's claiming Atlas was there for rehabilitation after combat stress made him unsuitable for continued deployment." "That's a lie," Abby snapped. "He was half dead from neglect and abuse." "I believe you. But Townsend has friends in the sheriff's department. They've got your description from security footage." Ellie hesitated. "There's more. Someone broke into my clinic last night. Nothing was taken. But my files were searched. They know I treated him." The news settled over Abby like a physical weight. She'd known there would be consequences, but hadn't anticipated how quickly Townsend would mobilize against them. Her military training had prepared her for many threats, but not for becoming a fugitive in her own country. "We need evidence," she said finally. "Proof of what was happening at that facility. Proof that Atlas wasn't the only one." "That won't be easy to get. Townsend's operation is buttoned up tight now that they know someone's watching." "I still have the flash drive," Abby said, retrieving it from her bag. "The transfer documents. It's a start, but we need more photographs, testimony, medical records showing the pattern of abuse." Ellie studied the documents, brow furrowed. "This proves military dogs were being transferred to Townsend's facility, but not what happened to them afterward." She paused, considering. "I know someone who might help. Former Army journalist. Runs a small newspaper now. He's been investigating Townsend's company for months, suspicious contracts, Questionable business practices? Can we trust him? Marcus Coleman is the most skeptical person I know. He asks questions first and believes nothing without proof. Ellie smiled slightly. Also, he served with your unit 2 rotations before you, 2nd Battalion, if I remember correctly. The name clicked into place. Staff Sergeant Coleman, built like a linebacker, always carried that ridiculous lucky compass. That's him. Came home with a Bronze Star and enough shrapnel in his shoulder to set off airport metal detectors. Runs the local veterans support group now, alongside the newspaper. Call him, Abby decided, but don't tell him where we are. Meet somewhere public first. While Ellie made arrangements, Abby returned to Atlas. The dog had finished his first full bowl of food since the rescue, a small victory, but significant. Healing would be a slow process, measured in incremental improvements rather than dramatic transformations. We'll figure this out, she promised him, keeping her voice steady despite the uncertainty churning inside her. No one's going to hurt you again. Marcus Coleman hadn't changed much since Abby had last seen him in a dusty forward operating base, still barrel-chested, with close-cropped dark hair now threaded with silver at the temples, and the same evaluating gaze that missed nothing. They met at a busy diner halfway between the sanctuary and town, a public place where neither Townsend's people nor law enforcement would risk a confrontation. Mitchell, he greeted her with a nod. No handshake, no hug, just the measured acknowledgement of one veteran to another. Ellie says you're in trouble. Not as much trouble as the dogs at Townsend's facility. Abby slid a USB drive across the table. Everything I have on the operation, transfer records, financial documents, surveillance photos. Marcus pocketed it without looking. Why come to me? Because you know what it means to leave someone behind. Abby met his eyes steadily. And because you have sources I don't... A muscle twitched in his jaw. Ellie mentioned a specific dog. Your partner, Atlas. She pushed, her coffee aside, leaning forward. We cleared routes together for 14 months in Syria. He saved my life in Raqqa when our unit was ambushed. 3 years later, I find him chained in a concrete kennel, 30 pounds underweight, covered in wounds from being used as a training dummy for attack dogs. That's a serious accusation against a decorated officer. Check the evidence. Talk to your sources. See if other handlers have lost track of their dogs after deployment. She kept her voice low, conscious of other diners. This isn't about one dog, Marcus. It's systematic. He studied her for a long moment. You know you could be facing charges, breaking and entering, theft of government property, assault on security personnel. Atlas isn't property. He's a Marine who served his country. Something shifted in Marcus's expression, a softening around the eyes that suggested her words had found their mark. He'd served alongside military working dogs. He understood. I'll look into it, he said finally. No promises. Townsend has influence around here, sponsors half the community events, donated the new equipment at the high school football field. People won't want to believe he's involved in anything shady. The truth doesn't care what people want to believe. He almost smiled at that. You always were stubborn as hell. Mitchell? He stood to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, I'm glad you got your dog out. I just hope you know what you're starting. I didn't start this, she replied quietly, but I intend to finish it. As Marcus dug into Townsend's operation, Abby focused on Atlas's recovery. Physical wounds healed more readily than psychological ones. The dog who had once confidently led patrols through enemy territory now startled at sudden movements and refused to enter small enclosed spaces. Loud noises sent him into panicked retreat. Human touch remained largely intolerable except for brief moments with Abby. Yet each day brought small improvements. He began exploring the sanctuary's grounds, first staying close to the barn, then venturing further as confidence returned. His coat regained some shine as proper nutrition took effect. The prominent ribs and hip bones gradually became less visible beneath recovering muscle. It was during this phase of careful recovery that Lily Patterson entered their lives. She arrived with her father, Jason Patterson, a former Army Ranger who managed the sanctuary's day-to-day operations. 10 years old, with honey blonde hair usually escaping its braid and eyes that seemed to take in everything without revealing her thoughts. Lily rarely spoke. Her autism made verbal communication challenging, especially with strangers. "Lily helps with the gentler animals," Jason explained, watching his daughter move through the barn with focused determination, delivering measured portions of feed to each occupied stall. "She has a way with them that I can't explain, especially the traumatized ones." Atlas watched the child from a distance, neither approaching nor retreating. Something about her deliberate movements and quiet presence seemed to intrigue him. Perhaps it was her predictability, no sudden gestures, no loud voices, or the way she avoided direct eye contact, instead looking slightly to the side in a manner dogs found less threatening. "She's read about military working dogs," Jason said one afternoon, observing the careful dance of gradual proximity between his daughter and Atlas. "Memorized the training protocols, equipment specs, deployment statistics. She doesn't talk much, but when she does, it's usually about working dogs." The breakthrough came unexpectedly. Abby had been exercising Atlas, encouraging him to rebuild muscle with short, controlled walks, when Lily appeared at the pasture fence. In her hand she held a weathered green tennis ball. "He's a patrol explosives detection dog," she said, her voice soft but precise. "Belgian Malinois, male, approximately 7 years old. Deployed to Syria with Marine Force Recon." Abby smiled, impressed with the girl's knowledge. "That's right. His name is Atlas." Lily nodded seriously. "Like the Titan who carried the world on his shoulders." She extended her hand with the tennis ball resting in her palm. "PEDD dogs need to maintain their retrieval drive even when they're not working. Otherwise, they get depressed." The simple wisdom of a child who understood what Atlas needed better than most adults struck Abby forcefully. She'd been so focused on his physical recovery and safety that she'd neglected the essential nature of working dogs, their need for purpose, for the stimulation of training. Atlas watched uncertainly as the ball passed from Lily's hand to Abby's. When Abby tossed it just a short distance, his ears pricked forward. Something stirred in his eyes, a flicker of the driven working dog he had once been. He didn't retrieve the ball that day or the next. But on the third afternoon, when Lily rolled it gently across the grass, he took 3 hesitant steps forward and nudged it with his nose before retreating. "Progress," Lily declared with satisfaction. As Atlas's physical condition improved, the legal situation deteriorated. Marcus brought unwelcome news during his first visit to the sanctuary. Townsend had filed formal theft charges, and the military police were now involved, claiming Atlas as government property, transferred legally to Townsend Tactical for rehabilitation. "They're painting you as unstable," Marcus explained, sitting at the kitchen table with case files spread before them. Traumatized veteran obsessed with her former working dog, unable to accept his reassignment. "They've got your medical records, PTSD diagnosis, the pain medication for your leg injury." "How is that possible?" Medical records are private. Military records are different, and Townsend has friends in the system. Marcus looked genuinely troubled. There's more. Your father called me. Abby stiffened. Her relationship with Brigadier General James Mitchell had been strained since her medical discharge, his disappointment in her broken military career barely concealed beneath formal concern. What did he want? To know if the rumors were true, if his daughter had really stolen military property and assaulted private security contractors? Marcus's expression was carefully neutral. He said he could help if you turned yourself in. Returned the dog. Said he'd make sure you received appropriate psychiatric treatment instead of criminal charges. The betrayal stung, even though it wasn't unexpected. Her father had always prioritized the military's reputation over individual welfare, even his daughter's. Did you tell him where I am? Give me some credit. Mitchell. I told him I'd pass along the message if I heard from you. Marcus pushed a folder toward her. But we've got bigger problems. I've been digging into Townsend's operation. It's extensive contracts with private security firms worldwide, specialized training programs for police departments, even some classified government work that I can't access. And the dogs? That's where it gets interesting. Townsend Tactical receives retired military working dogs for assessment and rehabilitation. On paper, they're then placed with law enforcement agencies or suitable adoptive homes. He pulled out several photographs. But my sources can only confirm a fraction of these placements. The rest disappear from the system. The implications were sickening. How many dogs are we talking about? At least 60 over the past 3 years. And not just American military dogs, some from Allied forces as well. Marcus spread out more documents. Here's where it connects. Townsend also has contracts to provide pre-trained working dogs to private security contractors operating in conflict zones where U.S. military presence is politically sensitive. Abby understood immediately. They're recycling military dogs into private security roles without proper retirement protocols, selling government-trained assets. Worse, dogs deemed unsuitable for continued service, too traumatized, too injured, too old still disappear from the system. His voice hardened. From what my sources tell me, those dogs are used for training demonstrations. Live subjects for new handlers to practice takedowns, control techniques. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Abby steadied herself against the table, remembering Atlas's condition, the defensive wounds, the pattern of scars consistent with repeated attacks. We need to expose this. All of it. We need more evidence first, Marcus cautioned. Photographs, testimony from inside the facility, financial records showing the flow of money. Townsend's too well connected for accusations alone to stick. I can get back inside, Abby said, mind already racing through tactical possibilities. Now that I know the layout, absolutely not. Marcus's voice carried the unmistakable command presence of a senior NCO. Security's been tripled since your visit. You'd be walking into a trap, and Atlas would end up right back where you found him, or worse. Before she could argue, Jason appeared in the doorway, expression grim. We've got trouble. Someone just turned onto the access road black SUV. Government plates. They're about 10 minutes out. Abby moved instantly. Military training taking over. Atlas is in the back pasture with Lily. Get them both to the emergency shelter. Marcus, grab the evidence and my go-bag from under the bed. We need to move now. As they scattered to prepare, her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The contents froze her in place. I know where you are. I know what you took. This ends now. Townsend. The emergency shelter was little more than a reinforced root cellar beneath one of the outbuildings, its entrance concealed by stacked hay bales and farm equipment. Inside, solar-powered lanterns cast weak yellow light over concrete walls and stockpiled supplies. Water, emergency rations, first aid kits. Jason had prepared it for Montana's brutal winter storms, not for hiding fugitives. But it would serve. "Stay with them," Abby told Jason, helping Lily settle on a cot in the corner. Atlas pressed against the girl's leg, his body tense but protective. Something in their shared wariness had forged an unlikely bond. The traumatized war dog and the child who found most human interaction overwhelming. "I need to see who we're dealing with." "Their government," Jason warned. "Could be military police, FBI, even local sheriff with federal backup. You can't fight that." "I'm not planning to fight." Abby checked her phone, 1 bar of signal, barely enough to communicate. "But I need to know exactly what we're facing before we decide next steps." She slipped out through the cellar's secondary exit, a narrow tunnel opening into a drainage ditch behind the barn, and made her way to a ridge overlooking the main house. The black SUV had parked in the yard, but no one had exited yet. Abby adjusted her binoculars, focusing on the vehicle's occupants. 2 men in suits, federal agents, judging by their bearing, 1 woman in civilian clothes, and in the passenger seat, Colonel Richard Townsend himself, his silver hair and square jaw unmistakable even at this distance. Her phone vibrated with a text from Marcus. "U.S. Marshals plus Townsend. They have a warrant for your arrest and seizure of stolen government property." "Stay hidden. I'm trying to stall." Through the binoculars, Abby watched Marcus emerge from the main house, hands visible, shoulders relaxed in deliberate, non-threatening posture. Smart, a former soldier who knew how federal agents operated, would appear cooperative while giving nothing away. She couldn't hear the conversation, but the body language told its own story. Townsend remained in the vehicle while the agent spoke with Marcus, who gestured around the property as if giving a tour. She'd only bought minutes, not hours. The decision crystallized with cold clarity. Atlas couldn't return to Townsend's facility. But if she fled with him now, she'd be a fugitive, unable to expose the systematic abuse. Either choice meant failure, unless there was a third option. Abby texted Ellie, "Need immediate extraction for A. Not safe here. Marshals with T in person. Can you come with trailer in next 20-minute emergency vet transfer?" The reply came seconds later. "On my way. South Access Road. Yes, bring medical gear. Make it look official." She moved quickly back to the shelter. Inside, Lily was reading quietly to Atlas from a dog training manual, her voice soft and steady despite the tension surrounding them. The Malinois lay with his head on her lap, alert but calmer than Abby had seen him since the rescue. "We need to move, Atlas," she told Jason, keeping her voice low. "Townsend is here personally. Whatever happens, he can't find this dog." "What's the plan?" Jason asked, already gathering emergency supplies. "Ellie's coming with her trailer. She'll take Atlas somewhere safe while I deal with Townsend and the marshals." She knelt beside Lily, meeting the girl's solemn gaze. "I need your help, Lily. Atlas trusts you." Lily nodded, one hand resting protectively on the dog's shoulder. "They want to hurt him again." "Yes, and we're not going to let that happen. But he needs to go with Dr. Whitman for a little while." "I should go too," Lily said decisively. "He gets scared in vehicles. His heart rate elevates and he pants excessively." Jason started to object, but Abby cut him off. "She's right. Atlas responds to her. We need him calm and quiet during transport." She turned back to Lily. "Can you keep him settled? Keep him from making any noise that might give away your location." The girl's chin lifted with determination. "I've memorized calming techniques for combat-trained canines experiencing acute stress responses. Despite everything." Abby smiled. "I bet you have." They moved as a unit through the underground passage and across the property using natural cover, avoiding sight lines from the main house. Atlas stayed close to Lily, responding to her quiet hand signals, simplified versions of the tactical commands he'd been trained with. His military instincts were returning, dormant muscle memory reactivating through consistent, gentle handling. Ellie's veterinary trailer appeared precisely on schedule, rolling quietly up the service road that circled behind the property. The veterinarian worked quickly, helping Lily and Atlas into the modified horse trailer equipped with medical supplies and restraints that wouldn't be needed. "Head for the place we discussed," Abby told her, passing over a backpack containing Atlas's medication and the evidence they'd gathered. "I'll contact you when it's safe." "What about you?" Ellie asked, concern evident in her expression. "I'm going to give Townsend what he came for." She smiled grimly. "Me." As the trailer pulled away, Abby steeled herself for what came next. The evidence was secure with Ellie. Atlas was safe with Lily. Now she needed to become the distraction that would allow Marcus time to implement the next phase of their hastily constructed plan. She walked openly toward the main house, hands visible, pace unhurried. The U.S. Marshals spotted her immediately, moving to intercept with practiced efficiency, hands on weapons, but not drawing. "Sergeant Abigail Mitchell," one called out. "We have a federal warrant for your arrest on charges of theft of government property, breaking and entering, and assault. Get on your knees. Hands behind your head." Abby complied without resistance, eyes fixed on Townsend as he emerged from the SUV. The colonel looked exactly as she remembered from military functions, immaculately dressed in tailored civilian clothes. His posture ramrod straight, expression controlled. Only the tightness around his eyes betrayed his anger. "Where is the dog, Mitchell?" he demanded as the marshal secured her wrists with zip ties. "Gone," she replied simply. "Somewhere you'll never find him." Townsend stepped closer, voice dropping so only she could hear. "You have no idea what you've done. This goes beyond one dog. You're interfering with classified operations essential to national security." Funny way to describe abusing retired military working dogs for profit. His expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "That animal was government property, legally transferred to my facility for rehabilitation and reassignment. Your emotional attachment doesn't change that reality." "He has a name," Abby said, rising to her feet as the marshals flanked her. "His name is Atlas, and he deserved better than being used as a punching bag for your training demonstrations." "Take her," Townsend ordered, turning away. "And search the property thoroughly. The dog must be here somewhere." The marshals guided Abby toward the SUV, but her focus remained on Marcus, who stood watching from the porch. Their eyes met briefly, a silent message passing between them. The plan was in motion. What Townsend couldn't know, was that while he focused on recovering Atlas, he had stepped directly into a trap of their own making. The county courthouse hummed with unusual activity for a Wednesday morning. Journalists from local papers clustered near the entrance, alerted by an anonymous tip about a case involving a decorated Marine veteran arrested for rescuing her military working dog from alleged abuse. Abby sat at the defendant's table beside her court-appointed attorney, a young public defender visibly intimidated by the federal prosecutors across the aisle and the distinguished military officer sitting behind them. Her leg ached from the uncomfortable holding cell she'd spent the night in. the pain made worse by being denied her prescribed medication during processing. This preliminary hearing would determine if she remained in custody pending trial, a formality given the federal charges against her, but one that Marcus had insisted was crucial to their strategy. "All rise," the bailiff announced as Judge Eleanor Simmons entered, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s with a reputation for meticulous adherence to proper procedure. The proceedings began with the prosecution outlining the charges: theft of government property, breaking and entering, assault on private security personnel, and obstruction of justice. The federal prosecutor emphasized the seriousness of stealing a military asset and the premeditated nature of Abby's actions. "Your Honor, the defendant has demonstrated she is both a flight risk and a danger to others," he concluded. "We request she be held without bail until trial." "Your Honor," Abby's attorney began hesitantly, "my client is a decorated Marine veteran with a Purple Heart. She believed she was rescuing her former military working dog from abusive conditions." "Objection," the prosecutor interrupted. "Unfounded allegations against a respected government contractor with no evidence presented." "Sustained," Judge Simmons responded. "Counsel, please restrict your arguments to matters pertinent to bail determination." Abby felt a flicker of despair. Without evidence, she was just a traumatized veteran who had broken multiple laws based on personal conviction. The system wasn't designed to accommodate moral certainty without proof. As her attorney continued arguing weakly for reasonable bail, the courtroom doors opened. Heads turned as Marcus Coleman entered, followed by Ellie Whitman and 3 men Abby didn't recognize. They took seats directly behind her, their presence a tangible show of support. Judge Simmons was about to rule when Marcus stood. "Your Honor, I respectfully request permission to address the court as amicus curiae in this matter." "And you are?" the judge asked, peering over her reading glasses. "Marcus Coleman, Your Honor, editor of the Clearwater County Gazette and president of the local Veterans of Foreign Wars chapter. I have information directly relevant to these proceedings that the court should consider before ruling." The judge considered for a moment, then nodded. "Proceed, Mr. Coleman, but be brief." Marcus approached the bench, handing folders to both the judge and the prosecutors. "Your Honor, these documents demonstrate that the facility from which Sergeant Mitchell rescued her military working dog is under federal investigation for fraudulent contracting practices, animal cruelty, and misappropriation of government property." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Townsend leaned forward, whispering urgently to the prosecutor, whose expression darkened as he flipped through the pages. "Furthermore," Marcus continued, "we have documented evidence that multiple military working dogs transferred to Townsend Tactical Solutions were subjected to systematic abuse, with many used as live training subjects in violation of federal animal welfare regulations and military protocols regarding the treatment of retired service animals." Judge Simmons frowned, examining the documents. "These appear to be classified military communications. Mr. Coleman, how did you obtain them?" "They were provided by a whistleblower within Townsend's organization." "Your Honor, and verified by 3 separate military sources who have signed affidavits included in that folder." Additionally, he nodded toward the men who had accompanied him, "these gentlemen are representatives from the Department of Defense Inspector General's office, who opened an official investigation this morning based on evidence provided by Sergeant Mitchell." Townsend stood abruptly. "This is preposterous. These are fabricated documents designed to—" "Sit down, Colonel," Judge Simmons ordered sharply. "You have no standing to address this court." She turned to the men Marcus had indicated. "Is this accurate?" Is there an ongoing DoD investigation into Colonel Townsend's operation? One man stood, his posture unmistakably military despite the civilian suit. Yes, Your Honor. I'm Special Agent Robert Hammond with the Defense Criminal Investigative Service. As of 0800 this morning, we executed search warrants at all Townsend tactical facilities based on evidence suggesting systematic mistreatment of military working dogs and fraudulent contracting practices. The courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed for the doors, phones already to their ears. The federal prosecutor looked stricken, staring at the documents as if they might explode. And Colonel Townsend, the decorated officer, the respected community leader, had gone deathly pale, his carefully constructed facade crumbling under the weight of exposed truth. As the judge called for order, Abby turned to find Marcus watching her with the ghost of a smile. Their gamble had paid off. While Townsend focused on capturing her and recovering Atlas, Marcus had been coordinating with military whistleblowers and federal investigators, building the case that would expose the entire operation. Agent Hammond approached the bench with additional documents. Your Honor, in light of Sergeant Mitchell's cooperation with our investigation and the evidence suggesting her actions were taken to prevent ongoing animal cruelty, the Department of Defense requests that all charges related to this matter be dismissed, pending completion of our investigation. Judge Simmons studied the request, then looked directly at Abby for the first time. What she saw, a decorated Marine who had risked everything to save her partner, seemed to register behind her professional demeanor. "The charges are dismissed without prejudice," she announced, striking her gavel. "Sergeant Mitchell, you are free to go. However," her gaze sharpened, "I expect your full cooperation with federal investigators as this case proceeds." "Yes, Your Honor," Abby replied, relief washing through her. As the courtroom cleared, Townsend was escorted out by federal agents, his expression a mask of cold fury. When he passed Abby, he paused briefly. "This isn't over, Mitchell," he said softly. "You have no idea who you're dealing with or what resources I have." Before she could respond, Agent Hammond stepped between them. "Actually, Colonel, I believe it is over. Your accounts have been frozen, your facilities secured, and your contract suspended pending investigation. Please continue with the agents." Outside the courthouse, camera flashes greeted them as reporters shouted questions. Abby ignored them, turning to Marcus. "Atlas, safe," he assured her. "Ellie has him and Lily at a secure location. The DCIS has assigned protection until the case is fully processed." For the first time since finding Atlas chained and forgotten, Abby allowed herself to believe that justice might actually be possible, not just for one dog, but for all of them. As they walked down the courthouse steps into the bright Montana sunshine, her phone buzzed with a message from Ellie, a photograph of Atlas lying in a sunbeam, his head resting trustingly on Lily's lap. The caption read simply, "He remembered how to play today. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was hope, and for today that would be enough." That. The first snowfall of winter blanketed the sanctuary in pristine white, transforming the Montana landscape into something from a postcard. Under normal circumstances, Abby would have found it beautiful. Today, staring at her phone's black screen, she felt only a cold dread that matched the weather. 3 weeks had passed since the courthouse victory, 3 weeks of cautious optimism as federal investigators methodically documented the evidence from Townsend's facilities. 17 military working dogs had been recovered alive, each bearing physical and psychological scars similar to Atlas's. Dozens more remained unaccounted for, their paper trails ending at Townsend Tactical's gates. Atlas had made remarkable progress, his physical condition improving steadily under Ellie's care. The trust between him and Abby grew stronger daily, small victories like accepting treats from her hand, sleeping in the same room, even occasional moments of playfulness that offered glimpses of the dog he had once been. Then, yesterday, everything had collapsed. "What exactly did Agent Hammond say?" Marcus asked, pacing the sanctuary's kitchen while Ellie made coffee. Atlas lay at Abby's feet, sensing her distress and staying close. "The evidence is gone," Abby replied flatly. The key files documenting Townsend's illegal transfers and the video footage from inside the facility, all of it disappeared from the secure server at the DCIS field office. The physical copies we provided were found shredded in a dumpster behind the federal building. Marcus stopped pacing. "That's impossible. Those servers have military-grade security. Someone with high-level access authorized a routine system purge that just happened to target our specific evidence files." Abby's voice remained steady, though her hands trembled slightly. "The whistleblower who provided the internal communications has suddenly recanted, claiming stress-induced confusion. And the 3 handlers who gave sworn statements about their dogs being transferred to Townsend's facility without proper retirement protocols, all 3 received unexpected overseas deployment orders yesterday." Ellie set coffee mugs on the table, her expression grim. "Townsend's connections run deeper than we thought. The judge dismissed the case against me this morning," Abby continued. "Not enough evidence to proceed, which means Atlas is legally still considered military property," Marcus finished, understanding the implications immediately. "Property that Townsend can claim was stolen." The realization hung heavy in the room. Without evidence of abuse, without documentation proving misconduct, they had no legal grounds to keep Atlas from being returned to Townsend Tactical, back to the facility where he'd been starved, beaten, and used as a training dummy for other dogs. "We could run," Ellie suggested quietly. "I have colleagues in Canada who work with rescue organizations. They could help get you both across the border." Abby shook her head. "That's not the answer. We'd be looking over our shoulders forever. And what about the other dogs? What about handlers who don't know what happened to their partners?" She reached down to touch Atlas's head gently. "Running won't solve this." "Neither will martyrdom," Marcus countered. "Townsend just demonstrated he can reach into federal agencies and manipulate evidence. You think he can't find you regardless of what legal protections you try to arrange?" The harsh truth was that Townsend had outmaneuvered them. By destroying the evidence while maintaining his public reputation, he'd created a situation where the legal system would likely support his claims. A decorated colonel against a PTSD-diagnosed veteran with documented mental health issues. The outcome seemed predetermined. Abby's phone rang, breaking the tense silence. The caller ID showed only "unknown." "Mitchell?" she answered, putting it on speaker. "Sergeant Mitchell, this is Richard Townsend." The colonel's voice filled the kitchen, causing Atlas to stiffen instantly. "I believe it's time we discuss the return of military property currently in your possession." Abby's jaw tightened. "Atlas isn't property." "The law disagrees," Townsend replied smoothly. "My attorneys will be filing for immediate recovery of the animal tomorrow morning, along with damages for the disruption to our training programs and the unfounded accusations against my company." "Well, we have evidence." "Do you?" His tone conveyed smug satisfaction. "My understanding is that the case has been dismissed due to lack of evidence." The unfortunate technical error, I'm told. Marcus leaned forward. This is Marcus Coleman, Colonel. You should know we've secured additional documentation that wasn't included in the federal filing. Documentation we're prepared to release to every major news outlet in the country. A brief silence. Mr. Coleman, how disappointing to hear you're involved in this situation. I understood you to be a more reasonable man. Reasonable men don't stand by while war heroes are abused for profit. Townsend's chuckle held no humor. We're all business people here. Let me propose a solution that satisfies everyone. Sergeant Mitchell returns the dog to my facility, signs a non-disclosure agreement regarding her unfounded allegations, and in exchange, I decline to press charges or pursue civil damages. And Atlas, Abby demanded, what happens to him? The animal will be reassessed for continued service. If deemed suitable, it will be redeployed through appropriate channels. If not, he left the sentence unfinished, the implication clear. Atlas pressed against Abby's leg, trembling slightly whether from recognizing Townsend's voice or sensing her tension. She couldn't tell. The thought of returning him to that facility made her physically ill. You have 24 hours to make your decision. Townsend continued when no one responded. After that, federal marshals will execute the recovery order, and my attorneys will proceed with both criminal and civil actions. I suggest you make the rational choice. Sergeant, the call ended, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. He's bluffing about the marshals, Marcus said after a moment. They can't move that quickly without solid documentation. Ellie looked unconvinced. Can we risk that? You saw what happened to the federal evidence? His influence clearly extends into law enforcement. Abby stood abruptly, causing Atlas to scramble to his feet beside her. We need to move Atlas somewhere secure. Now. If Townsend was confident enough to make that call, he may already know where we are. As they hastily gathered emergency supplies, Abby's mind raced through options, each less viable than the last. Running would make her a fugitive. Surrendering Atlas meant condemning him to further abuse or worse. Fighting through legal channels had already failed once due to Townsend's connections. They had lost the evidence, lost the legal battle, lost nearly everything. But staring down at Atlas, his trusting eyes fixed on her face even as they prepared to flee, Abby made a silent promise. She wouldn't lose him. Not again. Not ever. What she didn't realize was that the true tragedy had only just begun. Dawn painted the Bitterroot Mountains in hues of gold and rose when the convoy of black SUVs appeared on the sanctuary's access road. Abby watched from the ridge overlooking the property, Atlas at her side, as federal marshals and local deputies established a perimeter around the main buildings. They moved with the coordinated precision of a practiced tactical team, weapons visible but not raised, following standard procedure for serving a high-risk warrant. They brought a lot of firepower for one dog and a disabled veteran, Marcus observed, lowering his binoculars. They had expected this, but not so soon, not less than 12 hours after Townsend's ultimatum. He's not taking chances this time, Abby replied, noting the specialized K9 transport vehicle among the convoy. Someone had planned for Atlas's recovery with disturbing thoroughness. The night had passed in frantic preparation after moving Atlas to a hunting cabin deeper in the mountains, a location known only to their immediate circle. Ellie had taken Lily home against the girl's tearful protests, while Jason remained at the sanctuary to maintain appearances. Marcus had worked through the night, making calls to media contacts and veterans advocacy groups, trying to create enough public pressure to slow Townsend's legal maneuvers. All for nothing, it seemed. Townsend had moved faster, with more resources and higher-level connections than they had anticipated. "What's the play now?" Marcus asked, his breath fogging in the cold morning air. "I don't know," Abby admitted, watching as agents began a systematic search of the sanctuary buildings. Atlas pressed against her leg, sensing her unease but remaining silent, a soldier awaiting orders. "We can't outrun federal marshals indefinitely." Her phone buzzed with a text from Jason. "They have search warrant for whole property. Looking for both of you plus evidence. T here personally." Through the binoculars, she spotted Townsend emerging from the lead vehicle, his bearing military precise despite civilian clothes. The colonel surveyed the operation with cold efficiency, directing teams toward different areas of the property. Whatever happened next, he intended to supervise personally. "We need to move," Marcus urged. "They'll search the ridgeline next." As they retreated deeper into the forest, Abby's mind raced. Every option seemed to lead to the same outcome: Atlas back in Townsend's custody, herself facing federal charges. The evidence that could have protected them was gone, systematically erased by someone with enough authority to penetrate federal case files. They reached the hunting cabin by mid-morning, a small, weathered structure nestled among pines, isolated enough to be overlooked by casual searches, but not secure against a determined effort. Ellie was waiting, her truck hidden under camouflage netting. "They've got roadblocks on all the main routes out of the county," she reported, helping them inside. "State police are involved now. They're calling it a recovery operation for stolen military assets and a fugitive Marine suffering from service-related psychiatric issues." "Of course they are," Abby muttered, checking that Atlas had water. "Easier to dismiss everything if you paint me as unstable." "There's more." Ellie hesitated, then continued. "Your father made a statement to the press this morning, said he was deeply concerned about your mental state and urged you to surrender peacefully." The betrayal shouldn't have hurt, not after years of emotional distance, but it did. Brigadier General James Mitchell had effectively given the authorities permission to treat his daughter as mentally compromised, potentially dangerous. "Classic containment strategy," Marcus observed. "Discredit the whistleblower when you can't suppress the information." Abby sank onto a chair, the weight of their situation settling over her. "We've lost. They have the law, the resources, the narrative. Even if we run, Townsend will find us eventually." The cabin fell silent except for the soft crackle of the wood stove. Atlas moved to lay his head on Abby's knee, a gesture of comfort that only deepened her resolve to protect him, regardless of the cost to herself. The silence was broken by the unexpected sound of a vehicle approaching tires on the gravel access path that shouldn't have been discovered for days. "Someone followed us," Marcus said, moving to the window with his handgun ready. Former soldiers never truly left combat instincts behind. Abby signaled Atlas to stay, positioning herself between the dog and the door. If Townsend's people had found them, she wouldn't surrender without resistance, not this time. But the vehicle that appeared in the clearing wasn't a federal SUV or police cruiser. It was a mud-splattered pickup truck with a familiar logo on the door, Townsend Tactical Solutions. "It's not marshals," Ellie whispered, peering through the window. "Just one person." The driver emerged slowly, hands held visible, a young man in his 20s wearing a Townsend tactical uniform, his movements deliberate as if expecting a hostile reception. When he turned toward the cabin, Abby caught a glimpse of his face. "I know him," she said, recognition dawning. "That's Michael Townsend, the colonel's son." Michael approached the cabin with measured steps, stopping at a respectful distance. "Sergeant Mitchell?" he called out, voice steady. "I'm unarmed. I need to speak with you. It's about Atlas." Abby exchanged glances with Marcus, who positioned himself with a clear line of fire if needed. "Why should I trust anything from a Townsend? Because I'm the one who sent you the original files," Michael replied. "I'm the whistleblower who's been helping your friend Coleman, and I have something you need, the evidence my father destroyed." The revelation stunned them into momentary silence. Marcus recovered first, opening the cabin door while maintaining his defensive position. Michael entered slowly, hands still visible, expression solemn. He looked nothing like his father's slighter build, features more open, eyes lacking the colonel's cold calculation, but the family resemblance was unmistakable in the set of his jaw, the military bearing he'd likely absorbed from childhood. "You have 5 minutes," Abby said, remaining between Michael and Atlas, who watched the newcomer with wary intensity. Michael didn't waste time. "My father knows I sent you the original files. That's why he moved so quickly to destroy the evidence and discredit you. But he doesn't know about the backup copies." He carefully removed a small waterproof case from his jacket, setting it on the table. Complete documentation of every military working dog that came through Townsend Tactical in the past 5 years. Transfer records, medical files, training logs, and surveillance footage from inside the kennels. Everything the federal investigators lost, plus more they never saw. Marcus examined the contents with growing amazement. "This is comprehensive. Financial transactions, client lists for the dogs they repurposed to private security firms, even autopsy reports for dogs that didn't survive the training regimen." "Why?" Abby asked, studying Michael's face for deception. "Why betray your father?" Something dark passed behind his eyes. "Because I've watched what happens in those kennels since I was 16. Watched how he treats living creatures as disposable assets." His voice tightened. "I tried reporting it through proper channels 3 years ago. My father had the investigation shut down and had me assigned to the company's administrative division under his direct supervision. Said I needed to learn how the real world works." Atlas had moved closer during this explanation, studying Michael with focused intensity. To everyone's surprise, the dog showed no signs of fear or aggression toward the colonel's son. "He doesn't recognize you," Abby noted, watching their interaction. "I wasn't involved in the handling or training," Michael explained. "My father kept me away from the kennels after I tried to report him. Said I was too soft-hearted for the business." A bitter smile crossed his face. He was right about that much. Ellie picked up one of the files. "This is a complete veterinary history for Atlas, showing his condition when he arrived at the facility and detailed records of injuries sustained during training exercises. This alone proves systematic abuse." "But why come forward now?" Marcus pressed. "Why not 3 years ago when you first discovered what was happening?" Michael's expression hardened. "Because 3 years ago, I still believed the system would work. That military oversight and animal welfare regulations would be enforced once the right people knew." He gestured to the files. "I've spent those years documenting everything instead, building a case they couldn't ignore or bury." He turned to Abby. "When you rescued Atlas, my father became paranoid about exposure. He accelerated certain operations, began destroying records. I knew it was time to act before everything disappeared." The revelation shifted the entire dynamic. Suddenly, they weren't just fighting Townsend's legal maneuvers, they had concrete evidence of criminal conduct from the person closest to the operation. "There's more," Michael continued, pulling out his phone. "The marshals aren't just looking for Atlas. My father has obtained classified orders designating you Sergeant Mitchell, as a threat to national security for allegedly attempting to expose confidential military contracting procedures. That designation grants him extraordinary authority in your capture and detention." Abby absorbed this with military detachment, recognizing the tactical approach. "He's laying groundwork to make me disappear once I'm in custody." "Classic black operations protocol," Marcus agreed grimly. "Create a national security justification, then handle the problem outside normal legal channels." "We need to get this evidence to someone with the authority to stop him," Ellie said. "Someone Townsend can't control or intimidate." Michael shook his head. "My father's connections extend throughout the military chain of command and the Department of Defense. That's how he's operated for years, building a network of officials who benefit from his private contracts." "Then we go outside the military entirely," Marcus decided, already pulling out his phone. "I have contacts at the Washington Post and the New York Times. Get this evidence into the public domain where it can't be buried." "There's no time," Michael warned. "The marshals are systematically searching every property within 50 miles. They've already been to my apartment. My father will realize I'm missing any moment. And he knows about this cabin. We have hours at most before they find us." The gravity of their situation settled over the group. Even with Michael's evidence, they couldn't outrun federal authorities indefinitely. Someone would eventually catch up to them, likely Townsend's specially authorized team rather than regular law enforcement. "There's one more thing you should know," Michael said quietly, looking directly at Abby. "The veterinarian who examined Atlas at my father's facility after he was transferred from military service, Dr. Eleanor Whitman's brother, David Whitman, the same soldier Atlas saved in Syria during the ambush that injured you." Ellie gasped, color draining from her face. "That's not possible. David never told me," because he was under a confidentiality agreement. Townsend Tactical handles specialized military contracts that remain classified. "Your brother was bound by military law not to disclose his connection to the facility or any dogs he encountered there." Abby turned to Ellie. Remembering the photograph she'd seen in the vet's office, a Marine with facial scarring. You knew Atlas was the dog who saved your brother." "Not at first," Ellie admitted, voice shaking. "Not until David saw the news reports about your case. He called me the night after your first court appearance, told me everything how a Malinois named Atlas had dragged him from an ambush, how he later learned the dog had been transferred to Townsend's facility for evaluation after his handler was injured. The pieces aligned with devastating clarity. That's why you helped us without question." Abby realized. "You were repaying a debt to the dog who saved your brother. He said he tried to check on Atlas after learning where he'd been sent." Ellie continued, tears forming. "But Townsend denied him access, claimed Atlas had been adopted by a private family." The cabin fell silent as this new connection settled over them. The coincidence seemed almost too perfect, except that military working dogs affected countless lives, creating unseen connections that spanned continents and years. Atlas, sensing the emotional shift, moved to Ellie's side, pressing against her leg as if offering comfort. In that simple gesture, the truth became undeniable. He was not property to be claimed or discarded, but a being whose actions had created ripples of consequence through dozens of human lives. "We need to move," Marcus said, breaking the moment. "Michael's right. This location isn't secure. We take this evidence and Atlas somewhere Townsend can't reach, then release everything to the media simultaneously." As they quickly gathered essentials, Abby's phone buzzed with a message. Her blood ran cold as she read it. "I know where my son has gone. I know what he's given you. This changes nothing except the consequences. Surrender Atlas immediately. or what happens next will be your responsibility alone. Townsend. The threat hung in the air, its implications clear. Colonel Townsend was done playing by any rules, even his own. Spring sunlight filtered through the windows of the modest rancher on the outskirts of Bozeman, casting warm patterns across the living room floor where Atlas lay dozing. At 7 years old, nearly 50 in human equivalent for his breed, the Belgian Malinois had earned his peaceful retirement. The gray around his muzzle had spread, and his once powerful frame had mellowed into the dignified build of an older dog, but his eyes remained bright and alert whenever they opened to track movement through the house. Abby watched him from the kitchen doorway, coffee mug in hand, marveling at how far they'd come in the 18 months since that desperate flight from Townsend's forces. The legal battles, the media storm, the congressional hearings, all of it seemed distant now, like scenes from someone else's life playing on a screen. What remained was this: a quiet home, a healing dog, and the knowledge that something fundamental had changed in how America treated its four-legged veterans. "Thinking deep thoughts?" Ellie asked, joining her with her own coffee. The veterinarian had become a fixture in their lives, her regular visits to check Atlas's health evolving naturally into friendship, and eventually more. "Remembering," Abby corrected, smiling slightly. "Hard to believe it's been over a year since the hearing." The congressional hearing had been the culmination of their fight, broadcast live across multiple networks, with Atlas's story as the emotional center of a larger investigation into military working dog treatment. Abby could still picture the chamber packed with media, veterans, and political figures, all eyes fixed on the scarred Malinois sitting calmly beside her as she testified. Colonel Richard Townsend had arrived surrounded by attorneys and supporters, his military bearing undiminished by the allegations against him. He had projected absolute confidence right until Michael took the stand and systematically dismantled his father's empire with irrefutable documentation and first-hand testimony. The true turning point had come when David Whitman testified, describing how Atlas had dragged him to safety during the same ambush that injured Abby, then detailing his failed attempts to check on the dog after learning he'd been transferred to Townsend's facility. His emotional testimony from a decorated Marine officer with impeccable credentials had shifted the entire narrative. "Did you see this morning's report?" Ellie asked, sliding her tablet across the counter. The headline read, "President signs Atlas Act. New protections for military working dogs ensure proper retirement and handler reunion options." Abby nodded, a quiet pride warming her chest. The legislation, named after the dog now snoring gently in her living room, created the most comprehensive protection system for military working dogs in American history. Mandatory retirement protocols, medical care guarantees, and priority adoption rights for handlers had transformed what had once been classified as equipment into recognized veterans deserving of dignity and care. A car door slammed outside, rousing Atlas from his nap. His ears perked forward, but there was no tension in his body, just the alert interest of a dog recognizing familiar visitors. Lily burst through the front door without knocking, 13 now and growing into her lanky frame, braces gleaming as she grinned. "Atlas, we brought Scout to visit." Behind her, Jason guided a younger Malinois on a loose leash, one of the dogs rescued from Townsend's facility, who had thrived under the specialized rehabilitation program at what was now officially Atlas's Second Chance Ranch. Scout lacked Atlas's military precision, his movements more exuberant, but the intelligence in his eyes reflected the same capacity for service. Atlas rose to greet them, his movements measured but steady, Age and old injuries had slowed him, but Ellie's careful treatment and Abby's dedicated physical therapy routine had restored more function than anyone had initially thought possible. He approached Scout with dignified tolerance, allowing the younger dog's enthusiastic greeting with the patience of a teacher who understood exuberance would eventually mature into focus. "How's the training program going?" Abby asked, embracing Lily briefly before fist-bumping Jason. 26 dogs now, Jason reported proudly. 18 already placed with veterans. Scout here is heading to his new handler next week, former Army Ranger with PTSD, perfect match for his energy level. The ranch had evolved far beyond their initial vision, from a hiding place for one abused military dog to the nation's premier rehabilitation center for working dogs transitioning to civilian life. The publicity from the Townsend case had brought in donations, grants, and partnerships with veterans organizations nationwide. What had begun as a desperate rescue had transformed into something that changed hundreds of lives, both canine and human. Marcus arrived last, newspaper tucked under his arm, his limp more pronounced on damp days like today. The injury, a bullet grazed to his thigh, was a permanent reminder of the night everything had nearly fallen apart. They had been cornered at a remote mountain cabin, surrounded by Townsend's private security team operating with questionable authorization from complicit federal officials. The colonel himself had led the operation, determined to recover both Atlas and the evidence his son had provided. What should have been a legal matter had devolved into an armed standoff, with Townsend's men firing the first shots when Abby refused to surrender. Marcus had taken a bullet meant for Michael, who had stepped forward to confront his father directly. The ensuing chaos might have ended tragically if not for the arrival of state police, alerted by an anonymous call about armed men in tactical gear on private property. The subsequent investigation revealed Townsend's team had been operating without proper jurisdiction, their federal authorization based on falsified security concerns. "You're never going to believe this," Marcus announced, spreading the newspaper on the kitchen counter. Sentencing came down for the last of Townsend's military contacts. General Phillips got 15 years for conspiracy, fraud, and misappropriation of government resources. Abby studied the article with satisfaction. The investigation had expanded well beyond Townsend himself, exposing a network of military officers and defense contractors who had profited from the systematic abuse of working dog protocols. What had begun as one Marine searching for her dog had ultimately unraveled corruption reaching into the highest levels of military procurement. "And Townsend?" Ellie asked, though they all knew the answer. "Still appealing, still claiming he was providing essential services to national security." Marcus shook his head in disgust. 25 years doesn't seem adequate for what he did to those dogs, what he tried to do to all of you. The colonel's fall had been spectacular and complete. The man who had once commanded respect throughout military circles now occupied a cell in a federal penitentiary, his reputation destroyed, his company dismantled, his assets seized to fund the rehabilitation programs for the dogs he had exploited. Michael had testified against his father despite threats and intimidation, providing the detailed evidence that proved essential to the prosecution. Now he worked with various animal welfare organizations, using his insider knowledge to identify and address similar exploitation operations worldwide. "It's enough," Abby said quietly, watching Atlas and Scout through the window as Lily led them around the yard. "The system is changed. The dogs are protected. That's what matters." They gathered on the back porch to enjoy the spring afternoon, the conversation flowing easily among people united by shared purpose and victory. Atlas settled at Abby's feet, his steady presence a reminder of why the fight had been necessary and worthwhile. as sunlight warmed her face. Abby reflected on the journey that had brought them here from the desolation of finding Atlas chained and forgotten to this moment of peaceful triumph. The cost had been high, careers ended, relationships strained, safety threatened. Yet watching Atlas now, gray-muzzled but still regal, resting contentedly among those who had fought for him, she knew every sacrifice had been worthwhile. Some bonds transcended duty, regulation, and law. Some loyalties demanded everything in their defense. And sometimes, the greatest battles weren't fought on foreign soil, but in the quiet determination to right a wrong no matter the personal cost. Atlas raised his head, meeting her gaze with the steady, knowing look that had sustained her through combat zones and courtrooms alike. In that silent exchange lay the truth that had driven their journey from the beginning. He had never been merely a military asset or working dog. He had always been her partner, her fellow warrior, deserving of the same loyalty he had shown without hesitation or limit. The legislation bearing his name would protect thousands of dogs in the years to come, ensuring no handler would again have to break into a facility to rescue their partner, and no dog who served would be abandoned to abuse or neglect. Atlas's legacy would extend far beyond his own life, changing the very system that had once failed him. It wasn't just a happy ending for one dog and his handler. It was a transformation proof that even the most entrenched systems could be reformed when enough people refused to accept injustice. As the afternoon sun began its descent toward the mountains, casting long shadows across the yard, Abby smiled and whispered the phrase that had sustained them through their darkest moments, "No one left behind." Atlas, as if understanding the sentiment, pressed his graying muzzle against her hand in silent affirmation. The mission was complete. When we speak of loyalty, we often think of grand gestures and battlefield heroics, but true loyalty, the kind that changes lives and sometimes nations, is found in quieter moments. A soldier risking everything for a partner who cannot speak. A retired war dog lying faithfully at the feet of the one who refused to forget him. Atlas's story reminds us that our obligations don't end when uniforms are put away or when systems tell us that someone or something no longer matters. For those of us who remember Vietnam, who watched fellow veterans struggle after service, who understand what it means to fight battles long after coming home, this story resonates deeply. It asks us, what debts do we still owe? Who have we left behind? The Belgian Malinois, who saved lives in Syria and then needed saving himself, represents all who serve and are forgotten. His journey from abandoned warrior to catalyst for national change reminds us that it's never too late to right a wrong, that our capacity for loyalty should extend to all who've sacrificed, regardless of whether they walk on 2 legs or 4. Some bonds transcend duty, regulation, and time itself. Some loyalties are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.